I'm very interested in knowing is, at the time you joined the tech space, and especially the fintech space, it was certainly a man's world. How did you enter it, and what prompted you to enter this domain?
I think you just sort of read out the last part of my biodata. So you all know that I sort of didn't get here directly, right? Started off in science, did a MBA, and then started to work in a bank in the US. And that's where I sort of discovered my professional calling, if you please. You know, sort of like you, I changed from being a tennis star to be an ASCOM compeer. So what happened was the bank was upgrading its technology systems, and I was in the bank, but I didn't have a role that had anything to do with the technology upgrade. But inevitably, I just got interested, and I went around and started talking to those folks, and asking them questions, and got involved informally. And I guess in the end, the bank decided that they might as well formally move me into that department so that I can contribute on an ongoing basis. And after a bit, because I got involved with the technology upgrade in the bank, I decided what I'd like to do was to go back to college and get a master's in computers. So I went back, did an MS over there in Maryland, and the rest, as you say, is history.
Have there been mentors in your life, and could you talk about the gender of them and what role they played?
Okay. So I can't say there were specific mentors. I would say most of the people I worked with, my supervisors, pretty much ended up playing that role. And and they were all men, just because in the professional world, there were more men than women. So the people you interacted with were mostly men. So that's how it was. But I'd say the other way around. Now, if I was to mentor somebody, I mentor equally men as well as women, correct? And the kind of things I tell them is the same. It doesn't matter whether they're women or men. I give them the same information that I had growing up, and my view that if you have somebody who believes in you, stay engaged with that person and do your best. So, I think it's pretty much the same when I mentor people.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about gender equality and inequality a little bit. And do you have personal experiences with that? And particularly as you were rising in the ranks, could you touch a little bit on that?
Yeah. So I don't think I had many experiences of inequality. There was one or two occasions, but thinking back on it, I think what's important is for us to think about the intent of that particular interaction. So I'll tell you one, which, thinking back, I had to drag it out of my mind when you asked me the question. So it's not, really top of mind for me, but it's interesting. So I had just finished one of my technology projects, and my supervisor, who was, of course, a male, called me and said, we have this set of projects, and you can choose from amongst them what would you like to do. And he laid them out, and there was one which is setting up the technology for a stock exchange. And that sounded really interesting to me, and it was in Nigeria. So when he asked me, I chose this particular project, setting up the technology over there. And he just started laughing, and he said, do you realize that in Nigeria, you need to have an armed escort to get you from your home to your workplace? So I said, yeah, well, if you provide it for the other employees, I'll go as well, right? So it didn't, make a difference to me, and I was really keen to go do it. It sounded very exciting to me. But he made a decision and chose not to give me the project. He put me in another project. So yeah, at that time I thought, that wasn't quite fair. And he had asked me what I wanted, and I told him, right? But in hindsight, when I think about the intent of that decision, I don't think it was wrong. He had the responsibility of making sure his employees were properly taken care of and stuff like that. So perhaps at that time, it wasn't. And the other part was the project that he did end up giving me ended up being much bigger and giving me a lot more opportunity to build my potential. So I think it ended up positive. Right. So thinking in hindsight, the intent was positive.
Right. It wasn't a negative
yeah,
trying to bring you down.
Yeah. So that's something you have to. Of course, there are occasions, I can't think of one in my own experience, but if that should happen, you have to stand up for it. I think you have to sense the reason for the event, and then.
What is the direction that we're taking with banking in India? And then I'll follow up right now. Where do you see we're going to be 10 years from today, so 2025?
Okay. So I'll take the first one. What is the direction that we're going in, right? To answer that, I have to give you a little background, right?
Sure.
So people who use banking are consumers, people like all of the people in this room, right? And you have experiences from all the other industries as well. You go shopping, you spend time in entertainment and things like that. So these industries have started to do a number of technology innovations, right? So when you go shopping, you don't necessarily go to a store. You do, you purchase something on the web. You have, e-commerce. If you have to book a ticket for a movie, you do so on your mobile phone, and things like that. So when you want to interact with your bank, you expect to have the same kind of convenient experience, right? Why should banking be more painful? Why should you have to take up your checkbook and walk yourself down to the branch? Sure. Why can't that experience be as simple and easy as on an e-commerce site? So I think the customers' expectations have been set by other industries out there. So now it's up to the banks to start giving similar kind of experiences, at least in the consumer banking side. Perhaps in the corporate side, it's more about convenience and things like that. But that's, I think, the direction of what a lot of banks are going to do.
And now I just want to talk a little bit, we mentioned RBI and whatnot, a little bit about demystifying the security, okay? So if you can just sort of go over some of the security policies for us, for example, the one-step and two-step authentication, as well as the cloud-based enablement, if you can just explain those.
I'll talk about that. Okay. That's just one part of information security, right? Basically, anytime you log in, especially on the internet, they require that there is two-factor authentication. That simply means, give me two pieces of information to tell me that you are who you say you are. And you do two pieces just to make sure that if the bad guy has got hold of one of your passwords, the second one will save you, right? So what it says, you first put in your account number and then you put in your password. Your password is something that you're supposed to know and keep in your head, but we all know that we write things down and slip it under our papers and on our desktops and all of that stuff, right? So we know that. So the second factor is something that we try to create dynamically. That means you create it at that moment in time, so you have no choice of writing it down and sticking it in your purse. So the second factor is basically at that point in time, after you put your password, your bank will send you some piece of information, which is normally a 6-digit code or some such data, which will come to you either on SMS or an email, and then you take it out and you put that in, and then we know it's really you.
We see other countries, or for example in the US, Apple Pay and whatnot has started. What are some interesting global comparatives and with technology innovation, especially in the fintech space, and how do you think we as Indians can adopt it and customize it and make it viable?
Okay. So, I'll start by giving you one interesting piece of information. The core technologies that a bank needs, the core systems, either for running the ATM or the accounting systems in the bank, in the Western countries, particularly in the US, all run on what we call mainframes, which are large systems, large machines, which tend to be a little bit more expensive. On the other hand, if you look at core banking solutions in India or the ATM switches in India, most of them run on what is called as an open platform like Unix or Intel, which tend to be a little less expensive, especially when the banks are not very big, when the volumes of transactions are not very big. So why is it that the Western countries are still on the mainframes? It's because it takes a whole lot of effort and a lot of risk to get off one particular platform and go put on the other. And it so happens that by the time when the West was first starting to automate the banks, there were no open systems. They weren't existing, or they weren't, you know, ready. While by the time India started to put up and automate their banks, these systems were already there. So we sort of leapfrogged the whole problem of first going on to a mainframe and then coming back. So I think we got some of the advantages of starting to, you know, automate later. So I think we have an advantage over there because, you know, of course, mainframe applications are very stable and things like that. But at the same time, I think some of the ones that we have on open systems are probably lower cost. It's, you know, easier to deploy. So there are actually some advantages in being in India. I think if you ask me to compare with technologies in the West, I think most of the private banks at least are in what I call the systems of record, where the basic accounts of the banks are sitting. I would say they compare very favorably to those in the West. I would say we are at the same level of, you know, technology capability. What we still need to do is in the customer experience area. We need to focus more on that and do more of that. So I'll give you one example of how we have started to do it. I told you the technologies available are all the same. The needs or the requirements are different, and the infrastructure is different, right? So we had a situation where we have farmers coming to a milk cooperative, you know, actually to the Amul milk cooperative, and they come every day with a half a liter or 1 liter of milk, and they give it to the cooperative, and they need to be paid 20 rupees, 40 rupees, 50 rupees, things like that. And when you deal with small amounts of money, many times in a day, the money tends to go missing, right? It just gets lost, doesn't necessarily get communicated to the right farmer, and things like that. So here's an example of how we were able to apply technology. We got a card, it's called a prepaid card. It's a, you know, piece of plastic card, just like it is like a debit card or a credit card. And every day the farmer, when he comes with his milk, instead of giving him cash, we load that money onto that card. That means there is, you know, we can put it in. It's like having a prepaid travel card or something like that. So we put in his 20 rupees, 40 rupees, 50 rupees on a daily basis. So all of that cash is sitting, that information is sitting on his card, and once a week or once a month, the farmer can take it to his local Kirana shop, and the Kirana shop has something called a little mini ATM. He swipes the card and he authenticates. That means he tells him who he is by putting his thumbprint over there, his biometric of his thumb, and he's able to get the cash. So rather than having all of these little small amounts of money being given to the farmer and the money getting lost and not being communicated and having a lot of arguments about who gave the money, who didn't, here is technology. You have a small card, you put the money on the card, he takes it at the end of the month to his Kirana shop, gets the cash, buys his grains or whatever he wants, and goes home.